to my channel and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about hip dysplasia. I have two of my daughters who were diagnosed with hip dysplasia, so if you're interested in that, then just keep on watching. Okay, so before I get into each of my children's journey with hip dysplasia, I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on the definition and some of the treatments and risk factors for hip dysplasia, just so you have kind of an idea of what that is, just in case you were wondering. Okay, so if you were to Google hip dysplasia definition, let me read to you what it would come up with. It says, hip dysplasia is the medical term for a hip socket that doesn't fully cover the ball portion of the upper thigh bone. This allows the hip joint to become partially or completely dislocated. Most people with hip dysplasia are born with the condition. So basically, your femur is, pretend this is your femur and the ball on top of your femur, and this is your hip socket. If you have hip dysplasia, you have a deformity of this combination. It could be that your hip, your pelvic hip socket is too shallow, so it doesn't fully cover the femur ball. It could be that your femur is completely dislocated, not even in the socket. It could be kind of just a general, it's kind of just general for any kind of deformity of the hip socket. Now, some of the risk factors for hip dysplasia could be family history. I think that's the most risk factor. Firstborn child. It's more prominent in females, and if your baby was born breech. Some of the symptoms that you as a parent could look for in your child if you suspect your child has hip dysplasia. Sometimes it's called clicky hip because the hip bone will click, it'll feel like a clunk kind of. And when you take your baby to well baby checkups, you'll see your pediatrician kind of brace the baby's hips like this and move the hip socket like this, and they're checking for hip dysplasia really when they're doing this, looking for a thunk or a clunk or something clicking. So if you feel clicking, that's a symptom, but not always. Some joints just click. You'll see uneven thigh folds in your baby's thighs, like the inner thighs. I'll try and insert a few pictures just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, but you'll see one extra thigh, or the creases are not symmetrical. Another thing you could look for is if you were to lay your baby down flat and put their feet up against their bottom. I'll find a picture of this, it's kind of weird explaining it. But then you look at their knees when they're bent. If one is up higher or down lower than the other, that means their legs are not the same length. You could also pull them straight in front of you, but this is kind of an easier way. That's another side effect or something you can look for. If your baby starts walking and they're walking with a limp, that's a side effect. And all these things, you could have none of these and still have hip dysplasia. Oops, thank you. Okay, let me go over some of the treatments for hip dysplasia, just in case you're wondering, because my babies have had a few of these treatments. For younger babies, probably before 6 months, younger babies, they treat those that are not a super severe case with a Pavlik harness. I'll insert a picture here, and basically it just holds the hips in their how they're supposed to be held, and what it's doing is hoping to kind of carve out and make those hip sockets a little bit deeper to get them going, and for a lot of babies that works, and after their treatment, after a few weeks, they've got healthy hips. And so, but if not, they might treat a child with a brace. There's so many different braces. In my experience, we used a camp brace. I'll insert a picture of that. And it kind of just does the same thing. It holds the hips in a position where it's hopefully carving out and making those hip sockets a little bit deeper to get them to just get in the place where they need to be. And sometimes that works, a lot of times it does, and then sometimes it doesn't. And usually if a baby is older than 1 year old and starting to walk, there, you know, as the baby gets older, there's less and less treatment that can be done that's not invasive. And so then you move into things like surgically carving out the hip, and you know, and then you need something called a spica cast, which is a cast down from like the trunk down here all the way down both legs, and it just holds the hips. I'm sorry if you hear her, she's like singing, it's just my baby. But hopefully you're not distracted. But it holds the hips where they need to be. So with that little bit of background, I'll go into both of my daughter's journeys with hip dysplasia, starting with my oldest. Her name is Emma, and she was the beginning of my whole experience with hip dysplasia. I had no idea what it was. I thought it only had to do with like dogs before Emma. When she was born, I took her to all her well baby checkups. They checked her hips. There were no clunks, like what I was talking about earlier. There was nothing that in what I had knowledge of that would make me believe that there was something wrong with her. Now looking back and have known all this stuff, I did notice she had uneven leg creases and an extra fold, and then that would have been the big one, because I remember her just from the day she was born having that, and I can't tell you why none of the doctors noticed that, but me being uneducated, I didn't know that it meant anything. But anyway, when Emma, she started walking when she was about 10 months old, started trying to walk, and it took her a really, really, really long time. You know, most babies, they start learning to walk and they fall down, and you know how it goes. If you have kids, you know, they fall a lot, but it kind of goes quickly. You know, after a couple weeks, they kind of got it down. Emma took a couple of months, and she fell down, and she fell down, and she fell down, and it was my first child, so I just thought, you know, maybe kids take a long time to learn to walk. But after a few months, I realized like she's not learning to walk, and then she started, when she did walk, she was limping around. So I thought, well, she's just a toddler, but something in my motherly instincts told me at her 1 year well baby checkup, let's just mention it to the doctor, see what she has to say. So I did. And she said, well, you know, she's learning to walk. It's probably nothing. It probably just fixed itself. But let's take an x-ray of her hips just to rule out something called congenital hip dysplasia. And I said, okay, sounds good. And she said, just go down the hall and I'll order an x-ray and we'll get that done today. So I took her down the hall. They did her little x-rays, and when we were done, the technician, the x-ray tech, she said, ma'am, come here. She said, I'm not allowed to do this, but do you see this? And I'm looking at it, and I don't know what hip x-rays look like, and I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I have never seen anything like this. And I was like, oh, really? And she's like, yeah, her hip is not even in, it's not even touching. And so that's kind of when I knew, oh wow, we're probably not gonna get good news from these x-ray results. And sure enough, her left hip was completely dislocated and her right hip was very shallow. And so we were immediately referred to an pediatric orthopedic surgeon, and he took one look at the x-ray and he said, yeah, she's gonna need surgery. She was 12 months old when I found this out, and that was scary. That was very, very scary. Meanwhile, I'm pregnant. So I have this huge diagnosis with my very first baby. I was 22 years old, 23, but I was pretty young. I'm pregnant with another one. I am now being informed my child's gonna need kind of invasive surgery and invasive treatment. Weeks of this big old cast, like it was just kind of devastating to hear this. So when she was 15 months old, we took her into surgery, and they had to do 3 different procedures. At this point, they're very long procedure names I don't quite remember, but he had to put the left hip back in the socket. He had to shave the bone on the right side, and he had to pull down the pelvic bone to make it nice and deep and to be covering the femoral head of her femurs. So a lot had to be done with her. And then they put her in this big bright pink spica cast is what it's called, and it went down both legs, had a bar to give it some stability. And I can remember going after surgery, it didn't quite hit me until we walked into the recovery room, and way off, she was the only patient because she was the youngest one. We were there at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Way off at the other side of the room, I see this pink cast, but it was quiet in there, and so I thought, well, I think she's doing okay. But as soon as we walked over there, she took a look at me and my husband, and she just lost it, and so did I. Oh, that was one of the hardest things about it. It was kind of like I got hit with a ton of bricks. Like, this is my reality now. This is her reality. Like, we're doing this. And so she was in the hospital for 4 days. She ended up losing a lot of blood and needing a blood transfusion. And poor thing, it just was a kind of a long road there. But once we got home, we kind of just treated her pain, kept her comfortable, and then like weaned her off of that, and then just started into our new routine and our new like reality of life. And you know, she did amazingly, better than I did, better than I could have ever expected. Like, she just adapted, and she learned how to crawl after a few weeks in that cast. She learned how, at the very end, she learned how to pick herself up and stand up. We did a lot of activities on the floor. I did painting with her. We just figured out things I could do with her, and we made it through. And then 12 weeks went by, and we took off the cast, and that was a very exciting day for both of us, I'm sure. Basically, we put her, she needed to be in that camp brace at night while she was sleeping and during naps. And then we just let her do what she wanted to learn how to walk again, to gain back her leg strength. Had like muscle atrophy in her legs. There was no more strength in her legs. So we just let her gradually gain up her strength in her legs, and it probably took about 2 weeks for her to start standing up again and taking those steps like along a wall, kind of just like a toddler would, learning how to walk. Unfortunately for her, while she was learning to walk, she fell, and what would have been just a normal fall for like a toddler learning to walk, it would have just been normal. For her, she fell, and I think she hit like tile when she fell, and she ended up breaking her femur. And I believe it's because her bones were probably a little bit weaker. They hadn't been moved or for like 12 weeks, and you know, all that had been going on. So her femur broke, and so I rushed her into the ER because I thought for sure her hip popped back out. But nope, she broke her femur, and so she had to be put back into a spica cast. That, I feel like I was pretty strong those 12 weeks in that pink cast, and probably because I knew, okay, take a deep breath, we're doing this, you know, I was prepared for it. But this, I broke down, I was devastated, I couldn't believe it. I was due to have a baby in 2 months. I thought that was in our past. I was just so like, are you kidding me? So she was put back into a cast for another 8 weeks. But this time it was only down one leg. So she actually ended up learning how to walk in this cast. It was kind of crazy, but she just learned to walk. And then just a month before, or a few weeks before my baby was due, she got out of her cast, and we were good. She learned to walk again, and I was like hovering around her every step, but she was fine. She learned to walk again, and she went pretty frequently for x-rays to make sure she was healing, and things were okay, and she was doing great. And with hip dysplasia, her surgeon basically told me, once you have hip dysplasia, you will basically always have it, and basically what they do is they try to make it as least severe as they can, to make it as closest to normal as they can. So Emma, whereas she would have been handicapped even now, she's 7 years old, if we would never have had it fixed, she would have been disabled now. Her hip was completely dislocated. So she's fine now. She runs around, she's crazy, she's all over the place. In her teens, she's gonna be fine. He said what we could maybe expect is she may have arthritis in her hip. She may need a hip replacement earlier on. She just may have a little bit more pain and might just struggle with her hips more so than somebody with normal hips would have. And you know, compared to what her reality could have been, I'm fine with that. We did what we could to get her in the best condition as we could, and so I'm good with that. Okay, so now having her diagnosed, I really just thought, you know, she's the firstborn female child. I thought it was just kind of a coincidence, and that was just what happened to her. The pediatrician that we have, she made sure to say, okay, any other baby that you have at 6 weeks, we'll just make sure to get a little ultrasound on their hips to make sure that they're healthy, just because, you know, you now have a history in your family. And so I thought, that's great, that's wonderful. So my next baby, 6 weeks came, we did an ultrasound, and her hips, they were fine, they were healthy. Okay, so that made me feel even more like it was just what happened to Emma. But now my third child was born in 2016. We did the same for her, and I fully expected for them to say, oh, her hips are fine, but no, definitely they were in the sockets. They were nowhere near as severe as Emma was, but they were definitely shallow. And with there's a lot of infant babies who their hips develop at different times. So at 6 weeks they may be shallow, but a lot of babies, they just kind of develop naturally on their own, and then they're fine like a few weeks later or whenever they catch up. And so we did like a repeat ultrasound a few weeks later, and they were still shallow. So then we were referred to orthopedic surgeon, the same one Emma had. And we started with x-rays, and again, they were shallow. So he said they may just develop on their own. Let's not jump to invasive conclusions. And so I trusted him fully. He took such good care and fixed my baby, my other one. So I trusted him, and we waited about a year. Well, it wasn't quite a year. We did another x-ray when she was a year, and they were still shallow. So he basically said, well, her hips are not developing the way that they need to be, and at this point they won't develop enough to be where they need to be. So he said we need to do surgery on her. And so me being a mom, first I felt guilty. I first in some way felt like this is my fault, like I was searching for it, and you know, she's walking fine, why do we need to do anything, she's fine. But you know, she wasn't fine. We can't see the bones unless we do an x-ray, you know. I felt like I was searching out this problem, and the only reason I found it and I'm gonna put her through this is because I was looking for it, and you know, and I just felt like I just wanted to forget that we even found it. I didn't want to have to put another child through this. And then slowly I started thinking more in the terms of like what a blessing it was for, you know, for Emma to have gone through this. That was the only way we found Eve's diagnosis. It's the only way we would have found it. And now we can give her a better quality of life in her future, because had we not fixed her hip dysplasia, she would have had some chronic hip pain in her probably her early 20s, maybe even earlier. And so even though she's not showing signs of pain now, or you know, signs of anything being wrong, there's still something wrong. And so I started to just focus on that and focus on doing the best thing that I could, being her mom for her now, and realizing that she's only 2 years old, she's not going to remember this. and I'm doing the best thing that I can for her. And so last year in November, she had her surgery, and the difference between having a 2-year-old go through this surgery and like a 1-year-old is huge. When Emma was 1 and went through this, it was just life as she knew it. And when Eve went through this at 2, she was talking and communicating and running around and very mobile for a very long time. And all of a sudden, her whole world stopped. And she was old enough to know like something major is going on, but young enough that I couldn't explain to her what was going to happen and her understand. So that was part of what was really hard for me, is just the guilt and the like, she's gonna be so confused. That was hard the first few days. She tried to get it off and she was very, very irritable, which I totally understood. And for like the first good solid 10 days, she was not the baby who I knew. Eve is normally a very vibrant, and she's charismatic, and she's just happy, and she's a lovely child. And so she was not the same child that I knew, and that broke my heart, that I feel like I changed her. You know, that's just a mom guilt thing. And so those first 10 days were extremely hard for her, I'm sure. For me, watching my baby go through this. But after 10 days, I finally started to see her come back, and she was adjusting and she was getting used to it, and we were taking her outside, and we were finding things for her to do. And so we just, you know, kept on trucking, and we made it through. And this whole experience with Eve made me thankful, you know, not thankful that Emma went through it, but finding the positive in Emma going through it. I knew what to expect. I was able to look back and know what to do when Eve like leaked out of her diapers into her cast, and know how to fix that and not just freak out. And you know, I knew how to hold her and how to just different things. And when Eve, she was only in it for about 8 or 9 weeks because it wasn't as severe as Emma's. And so January of this year, she got her cast off, and it was the most amazing day ever. I was so happy. When she was in her cast, she had to be like laying on the floor. My husband like MacGyvered some kind of seating arrangement that would be safe and keep her strapped to the floor in like a car seat that laid flat. It was kind of crazy, but she hated it. She absolutely hated it. But that was the only way we could get around. And so when we got out of the doctor's office, when they took off her cast, she was able to sit, obviously, and we put her in her car seat, and she, like, you could see her face was just, I've never seen her so happy. And she was like, "Mommy, I'm in my car seat." Like, she was so happy, and that was like the most amazing day. But so it took her another 10 days, I'd say, to learn how to walk. And most of that was because she was just afraid. She was now not very trusting of herself and of other people, because she just went through something totally crazy. And so I don't blame her. And I feel bad. Like, that's really sad to think that your child has like already lost trust in the world. But hopefully we get through that. But so those 10 days, she probably could have walked that day 4, but she just didn't trust that she knew how to walk. And she was afraid, but she learned at 10 days, she learned how to walk. And then a few weeks after that, she's running around. And now here we are, almost 3 months later after getting the cast off. And you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't even know she had a hip deformity at all. Same thing with Emma. She's been out of her cast, I guess, like 6 years now. And same thing, you wouldn't even know. So those are my experiences in my 2 girls' journey. And I guess at the end of this, I have realized that it's in my family. And so after all this, I've started showing signs of having some hip issues. And then my mom tells me about when I was a baby, the doctors were kind of unsure of my hips, and So we're pretty sure it's in my family, and maybe I had it maybe a mild case of it, and it was just never caught, never fixed. So, but that just makes me so thankful that in this day and age, my kids' hip dysplasia was caught, and we fixed it, and we did the best that we can, and we are giving them the best quality of life later. And so that's my experience with hip dysplasia. Please let me know what you guys thought. And if you have any experience with hip dysplasia, I love hearing other people's experiences and stories and journeys. I just feel like it's something that is a huge part of my life, and I love talking with other people about it. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe. I know this was a super long video, so if you made it all the way here, I love you. You're awesome. So I will see you in the next video, guys. Bye.